Okay. Welcome, everyone. Sandy Serini Elzier here. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy for the League of Women Voters of Michigan. Tonight, we're having a great panel discussion on Let Voters Vote, Why Documentary Proof of Citizenship is Needless Voter Suppression. Joining me tonight to help field questions from the chat are League of Women Voters of Michigan co-presidents Denise Hartzau and Lynn Kukmansky. We're delighted to have three expert panelists joining us this evening. They are Chris Thomas, former Michigan Director of Elections, Melanie Macey, Policy and Government Affairs Director at Promote the Vote, and Valencia Richardson, Voting Rights Attorney at the Campaign Legal Center. Each of our panelists will spend about 10 to 15 minutes discussing the issue of non-citizens voting from the state or U.S. perspective, and then we'll have our question and answer session. As a reminder, the League of Women Voters of Michigan, or League of Women Voters of the U.S., all over, is a nonpartisan political organization. The League works to advocate for and increase understanding of major public policy issues, such as the importance of making it easy for all citizens to vote. So with that, I'm pleased to turn the program over to Chris to begin our discussion. Chris?
Good evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. I am pleased to be here with my other panelists to provide clarity to an overly fraught topic of citizenship and voter ID. My simple premise when approaching these two topics that are the central pillars of the ballot proposal being circulated is the ballot proposal, SAVE Act, and the Department of Homeland Security's creation of the National Citizenship Database are disproportionate to the task at hand. Using a cannon to swat a fly. Why is the real question. Michigan's current toolbox has the means of addressing the issue of a handful of non-citizens registering to vote and a much smaller number actually voting. There are improvements at the federal level that could perfect our system without the specter of a national identification database being created. My role here is to discuss the Michigan perspective regarding DPOC, the Documentary Proof of Citizenship and Voter ID. But first, a 2-minute primer on Michigan's driver's license and voter registration files. Unlike nearly every other state, Michigan houses both of these files in one office, the Secretary of State. The highlights are the driver file, and every time I say driver file or driver's license, I'm also talking about voter ID or state IDs. They call them personal ID cards for those that don't have driver's licenses. The driver file and the qualified voter file, which is the statewide voter registration file, are connected. There are approximately 7.9 million active driver licenses and 7.2 million active voter registrations. Over 80% of the registrations are taken in person or online through the Secretary of State's offices. Over the last several years, the Secretary of State's office has upgraded the driver file to more easily distinguish non-citizens who have submitted documents establishing legal presence in the United States from citizens who have submitted documents providing legal presence and citizenship in the United States. Automated voter registration with the Secretary of State is designed to not offer non-citizens the opportunity to register. The system screens out non-citizens from registering to vote based on the records that they filed when applying for a license. This eliminates the human error in these transactions. Over the decades that motor voter has been in place, there were many errors made where non-citizens filled out forms, not understanding what they're doing. No longer will they even be given those forms. So that is a huge improvement. Approximately 4.8% of the qualified voter file does not have a Michigan license. This is my estimate based on the last numbers that I've seen. This is a very small percentage compared to other states. Under the Help America Vote Act, enacted back in 2002 after the Florida debacle, a person registering to vote must provide a driver's license number or the last four digits of their social security number. The identity of those submitting a social security number is presented to the Social Security Administration for verification. Unfortunately, citizenship is not an element that the Social Security Administration checks. To underline how centric Michigan is, driver-centric Michigan is, consider these figures submitted to the Social Security Administration under the Help America Vote verification program in the week ending on January 10th. Georgia, which is about the same size as Michigan, the same size of voter registration, they sent 7,211 Social Security numbers for verification. Indiana sent 4,732. Illinois sent 14,585 for verification. Michigan sent 80. 1 week in December, Michigan only sent 19 Social Security numbers. This underlines the fact that very, very few Michigan voters do not have a driver's license. The Secretary of State has citizen documents for somewhere around 95% of the voters. What does all of this mean? The Secretary of State showed us last year by verifying the citizenship of over 5.7 million voters who cast ballots in the 2024 November election. 15 non-citizens were found to have likely voted, or 0.00028%. Or another way, it is 28 hundred thousandths of 1%. This conclusion was accomplished by comparing the 7.9 million driver records with the 7.2 million active voter records. The task of verifying the citizenship of Michigan's electorate is largely completed. Yes, there remains work to be done to verify the entire file, including the remaining active voters who did not vote in 2024, and the inactive voters who did not vote in 2024. Michigan has the tools to build a non-invasive program to verify that the qualified voter file is composed only of United States citizens. There is some help that Washington could provide to make the final mile easier to accomplish. The Department of Homeland Security has maintained the file of non-citizens with legal presence in the United States, including those on visas and with green cards. Just recently, this file has been opened to verification of lists of voters. So voters without a license can now be assessed to determine how many, if any, are non-citizens. A small adjustment to HAVA could require that the Social Security Administration indicate the citizenship status of those who submit the last four digits of their Social Security number instead of their driver's license number. A major problem is the false positive created by the failure of the Department of Homeland Security to timely provide states with notice of recently naturalized citizens. A long lag between the time a person becomes a naturalized citizen and when the state receives this information leaves these new citizens in jeopardy to false claims of illegal voting. The federal government has no good program that timely reports naturalizations to state election officials. DHS should focus on fixing this type of problem rather than trying to complete a national citizenship database. You see, we don't need to create a massive multi-million-dollar program to accomplish the stated goals of the ballot proposal. I believe far more citizens will be disenfranchised by this ballot proposal because of the errors in the federal databases that are being reported, or their inability to locate the necessary documentation. In the past week, there has been media coverage of a county clerk who found 230 non-citizens in the driver file list used for the jury list. The driver file used for jury selection is not screened for non-citizens. So not surprisingly, you're going to find some non-citizens on that list. This is screened by the jury questionnaire that is sent to each juror who is selected. And on that questionnaire, there is a provision to indicate whether you are a citizen or not. The claim is that 15 of the 230 are not registered, or are registered, excuse me, in the qualified voter file, and 3 of them have voted. This needs to be verified by the Bureau of Elections before any final conclusions are made. In the 1980s, the legislature changed the jury list from the voter registrations to the driver file because it was understood some did not register to vote in order to avoid jury duty. There are also reports that some will check the non-citizen box on this questionnaire in order to avoid jury duty. I have just a couple remarks on voter ID. This proposal, the imposition of hard ID, which means no photo ID, no ballot will be counted. Currently, the Constitution, recently amended, allows a person to, without a photo ID, to sign an affidavit as a means of identification. This has worked well in Michigan since 2007. No one has presented many cases of identity fraud where someone votes as another person. It just isn't a thing, no matter how often it is repeated. The Secretary of State provides a breadcrumb path to discovering who has provided an affidavit rather than a photo ID. Research could be done, investigations had, surveys conducted, but no, crickets. No one follows up on this. Now it is so important that the Constitution must be amended. Really? A voter may still sign an affidavit under this proposal, but his provisional ballot won't be counted until he coughs up a photo ID within 6 days after the election. In 2016, there were 18,000 affidavits submitted. In 2020, around 11,000. In 2024, there were 9,900. So this comes out to a little less than 0.3% of the vote. So I will end here with my conclusion that this ballot proposal really does not take into account the resources that are currently present, and it is really not ready for prime time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Now we're going to have Melanie Macey put up her PowerPoint, and Melanie is the Policy and Government Affairs Director for Promote the Vote, and give us some more on the Michigan perspective. Melanie?
Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about those ballot initiatives that Chris is referencing. I gave some really good background facts. I'm going to reference them again in some of my slides too, to reinforce really what's happening here. So just a little background. I know we come from different places into this conversation. So what is documentary proof of citizenship? A lot of times we are calling it DPOC, which I think can be extra confusing for people, but documentary proof of citizenship, right there in the name. It's the document, it's a requirement to provide the document that proves your citizenship. So examples of this would be a U.S. passport. A U.S. passport, you have it if you're a citizen. A real ID, that's something that's talked about as possible documentary proof of citizenship, but most of the time it's not, because it doesn't say necessarily on there that you're a citizen. So even if you're required to be a citizen to get it, it's not indicative of your citizenship. And your birth certificate is what people always think of as the thing that people can access when they are looking for proof of citizenship. But it wouldn't work for me because I've changed my name. I changed it when I got married. And so my birth certificate indicates that someone's a citizen, but it doesn't indicate that Melanie Macey is. So I would need additional documentation to prove my citizenship. So actually, even nailing down what documentary proof of citizenship is a little squirrely. Here in Michigan, in response to the sort of concern of non-citizen voting and non-citizens registration that Chris has fairly thoroughly debunked, there are 2 ballot initiatives that have been circulating that are trying to put on the ballot questions for the voters of whether documentary proof of citizenship should be required to register and vote in Michigan elections. To get there, each ballot proposal has to collect 446,000 ballot signatures. So right now, people are out. You might probably have seen them at the farmers market and other places. I heard they're actually even outside the Secretary of State's office in Lansing, collecting signatures, trying to get to that number. They actually, because they need that many valid signatures, they really are collecting probably 600 or 700,000. So that's happening right now. They have a 6-month window to do that. And if they do get their number of signatures, they will appear on the November ballot. And it is possible there are 2 ballot initiatives circulating. If they both get that number of signatures, they both could appear. That's pretty unlikely in practical terms, but it is possible. So just quickly a review of what it looks like. If you're going to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, you draft a proposal of what the language would say, how you would amend the Constitution. You get the summary approved by the Board of State Canvassers. That's an optional step, but most people do take that step at this point. And then you have a 6-month window. So it's kind of a shifting window. So it's just like it has to start one date and end 6 months later to get the signatures required. And you have to have 10% of the votes cast in the previous gubernatorial election. That's why it's that bizarre number, because that's 10% of the last votes cast in the last gubernatorial election. Then you have to turn in the signatures by the deadline, which this year is July 6th. If the signatures are verified, that's a very long and grueling process that the Bureau of Elections will be working on for a long time in the summer. Then it goes on the ballot in a small question, a yes/no question. And if more than 50% of the voters vote yes, the initiative passes and it becomes law. So these initiative proposals that are circulating right now come from 2 different groups that are coordinating the proposals. One is called the Committee to Protect Voters' Rights. The group seems to have been formed just for the purpose of this ballot initiative, and it's very similar to the House Joint Resolution. So this is the House, Representative Postumus in the House tried to get this passed through the House and through the Senate. It's a very difficult path to do that, to amend the Constitution that way. You have to get 2/3 votes. It didn't even get past the Michigan House, but he introduced it in early 2025. Once it didn't get passed, then this Committee to Protect Voters' Rights came and brought this ballot initiative. And then, pretty hot on their heels, Americans for Citizens Voting Michigan, which seems to be a branch of a national group that's bringing similar proposals to other states. And they first brought their ballot initiative at pretty much the same time, but then they came back and brought a second version, and then I think they withdrew the first one. So these 2 are the ones that could be circulating. We have seen a lot more of the second one, Americans for Citizen Voting Michigan. Like I said, they both could get there if they cross the finish line with signatures. So what does this mean for Michiganders? Both of these proposals would do very much the same thing, but the essential piece of it is that they would change the Michigan Constitution and to require all registered voters provide documentary proof of citizenship. It would impact how people register for the first time, how they stay registered if you're already registered, and how you vote, and whether you're able to vote. So they apply across the board from the already registered, so people who have been voting for decades, as well as new registrants, and you're considered a new registrant when you move. So you have every time you move, you would be a new registrant and would be subject to this again. So I'm going to briefly say what's proposed that's in common between them, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what each one is, and then talk about the impacts some more. In both cases, they require accessing specific citizenship documents to register. So in both of them, there's some language about a verification process that the Secretary of State would handle, but it's pretty vague. And in those cases, it would be some of the things that Chris talked about, the citizenship documents that they already have at hand. It would be quite costly for the Secretary of State to deal with this, but in the in the end, the burden falls back on the individual to provide their documentary proof of citizenship if the time comes to vote and they have not been verified yet. It requires that your citizenship is verified in order to cast a ballot. So there's the providing the documentary proof of citizenship to register, but then also if you're already registered, you have to have your citizenship verified in order to cast your regular ballot. If at the time you go to vote, your citizenship has not been verified, you can only vote a provisional ballot. So it doesn't go in the tabulator, it's set aside, and you have 6 days to come and cure your provisional ballot by showing your documentary proof of citizenship to the clerk. It's going to be very overwhelming for the clerks, very overwhelming for individuals who are told that they are not able to cast a regular ballot. And provisional ballots, we know that they're luckily very rarely used at the moment, but they are almost never cured. So the provisional ballots that do happen right now, there's an extremely low cure rate. So this would be a lot of people who are casting ballots, hoping to vote and unable to get their vote counted. And as Chris noted, it removes the affidavit of identity option, an option that we have had and used with no problem in Michigan for decades now. And we have about, I think Chris said, about 10,000 in every election in the major every 2-year elections. Where that's used. And so that would be again another group of individuals who are disenfranchised at that moment, that they don't have their ID when they show up to vote, and then there's no option available to them. It does require those who are applying to vote absentee to provide a copy or original of their ID or the last 4 of the social security number. That's what they have in common. They both do essentially the same thing. The Committee to Protect Voters' Rights, can't block here. Okay, sorry. Has these specific things that are different than the other one. It doesn't define documentary proof of citizenship, leaving it up to the legislature to define later. A very dangerous tactic in this kind of political game that we're seeing. And it requires the Secretary of State to use an ongoing systematic process to verify the citizenship of all individuals in the voter file, which a little bit sounds like a kind of a continuous catch me once, catch you again, double jeopardy situation for people who are in the voter file. And it also allows the Secretary of State at any time to conduct an individualized review of the citizenship status of any voter, no reason given. So this gives incredible politically dangerous power to a Secretary of State. They could, choose to do an individualized review of everyone in a certain county or a certain area who didn't vote for them, perhaps. It really is a very odd quirk in this one that is a dangerous political maneuver. And it does provide for individuals to establish a financial hardship in paying document fees to obtain their documentary proof of citizenship or photo ID at no cost. Sounds really great. It would be very challenging to implement this for the clerks. If I were to go to my county clerk and say, I need my daughter's birth certificate, she wasn't born in Michigan, so are they going to go get it for me from Wisconsin, or are they going to pay me to get it back? So it's a great idea, but it doesn't seem it's another burden on the Secretary of State's office, another pretty significant cost for taxpayers that in the time wise it's not going to work very well. If you can't prove your citizenship in time to vote, you only have 6 days. There's no universe in which this hardship waiver is going to get my daughter's birth certificate from Wisconsin in time for her to cast her ballot. She's 18, so she could. The second proposal for the American for Citizens Voting in Michigan, it requires the Secretary of State as well to create the verification process, leaves it very undefined. It does define DPOC explicitly. It lays out all of the items that can be considered DPOC. It's similar to what you see in the SAVE Act with Valencia, we'll talk about later. And it does reference a process to provide other proof along with a sworn affidavit. This one's a little more open in that regard. However, it has very harsh criminal penalties for election officials for violations, which seems fine, except a violation could be providing material assistance to a non-citizen and attempting to register, which is a very hard thing for a clerk to know if they're doing. If someone comes and says, I need help registering, is the clerk going to have to think twice before they say yes? Because how do they know when they walk up if they're a citizen or non-citizen? Are they going to have to judge based on how they approach what they ask? So putting these harsh criminal penalties into the Constitution I mean, at the moment, there is no felony listed in the Constitution, and this would put it in there for the first time. And this second proposal, it only applies to elections starting after November 2027. So, there's a little bit of a time lag, but not much, since it's November 2026 is when it would be on the ballot. So that's what the proposals do. And here's the question: that's sort of a lot of barriers putting in place for Michigan voters, a lot of burdens placed on our election officials, on our Secretary of State. Is this a needed fix? I think Chris explained fairly well. There's really no evidence of widespread non-citizen voting in Michigan. This is not an issue. I have the number here. Chris referenced it. They did a thorough audit of the 2024 election. They did find some voters who they think may be non-citizens, but those numbers that they found were 16 out of 5.7 million votes cast. This represents 0.00028%. It's very small. This is not election impacting. And as Chris noted, there are systems in place, and the systems are getting better all the time. So, it's possible that someone who's registered decades ago and their data hasn't been checked in all of that time, the systems weren't as good. But because the driver's license file is so closely tied to our qualified voter file, and also there's now a requirement, you may have noticed this, that every, now I forget, is it 12 years? Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. 12, 7 years, 12. You have, when you're renewing your driver's license, you have to show up in person again with your documents. So it's kind of flushing through the system and making sure that everybody's caught up with their documentation on the driver's file. So the system, Chris noted already about secure automatic voter registration. So this is a new system for us here in Michigan, where you only get the option to be registered if you are presenting a valid citizenship document. If you're providing anything else, then you don't get the option to be registered. So the systems are improving, and this is really a non-issue and will become less and less one as time goes on. And so the proposal's negative impact would be that eligible voters would be disenfranchised. And we know that this will be largely more vulnerable populations. I imagine that many of the people who are on this Zoom tonight can find their birth certificate and maybe their marriage license if they need it, or their passport. But there are people for whom this would be a burden, and it would be a challenge, and it's unexpected. After decades of voting with no problem, showing up at the polls and being told that you need to have your documentary proof of citizenship is going to be problematic for people. And we've seen this. It's been tried in other states. They passed this in Kansas a couple 20 years ago now, and they had to get rid of it because it was declared unconstitutionally infringing on people's right to vote in Kansas, because 30,000 individuals were found to be denied the right to vote, eligible Americans. So we longtime voters who were born at home and may not have a birth certificate, or were born out of state, like my daughter, married women and others whose names have changed since their birth certificate was issued, low-income voters. This isn't just a prospective issue. It's also a retrospective issue. Like, getting your birth certificate costs money. It's like $40, and then it costs $80 if you wanted to get it rushed. And if you wanted to get it rushed, you're not going to get it in time. So this is, there is an equity issue here. And then rural voters, young people, new voters, less likely to have their documents on hand, and college students who are able to vote in Michigan. If you were attending college in Michigan, you can vote in Michigan. But I don't know if they're going to have their birth certificate handy. I know that my daughter, who is out of state at college, does not. And the voter rights that we just voted on are going to be rolled back. And Chris noted this as well. So, having to provide this information to get your absentee ballot, people are going to struggle to get their ballots. We just voted for no reason absentee. The affidavit of identity, we just confirmed that this is how we want to run our elections. We don't want to tell people they can't vote just because they can't find their ID on the day they show up for their election. And we just put in the Constitution in 2022, the fundamental right to vote. This is a fundamental right that we have here in Michigan. It's in our Constitution, and putting these additional barriers in is infringing upon that right. So the bottom line is that these proposed initiatives are trying to address this specter of non-citizens who are deciding our elections. It's just not the case. It's been repeatedly shown not to be an issue in Michigan or anywhere else in the country. Requiring DPOC will simply mean that some eligible voters are going to be turned away. They won't be able to vote. And looking at what's happened in other states when this has been passed, it'll be tens of thousands of eligible Michiganders who are not able to vote. And implementing the system will be costly to taxpayers. There's many places in here where the cost burden is very much skated over, and very burdensome and threatening for our election officials, especially the one that is adding a felony for them if they provide material assistance in registering to vote for a non-citizen. I just don't want our election officials who already have a lot on their plates to be having to think twice about helping others to vote. So that's what I've got on the Michigan perspective and the ballot initiatives. And now I'll pass it off to Valencia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Melanie Richardson, and I serve as legal counsel for voting rights at the Community Legal Center. We are a national nonprofit that focuses on voting in elections across the country, and we are so proud of all the work we get to do with both Promote the Vote and the Michigan League of Women Voters. I'm here just to provide, just to zoom us out a little bit. A big focus of our work is documentary proof of citizenship restrictions across the country. And that includes the proposed SAVE Act. And just to show folks why documentary, just to provide additional context that Melanie and Chris have all already provided, about why documentary proof of citizenship is not only unnecessary, but it poses additional burdens well beyond any benefit in terms of finding non-citizens, the incredibly marginal number of non-citizens who may or may not have registered to vote usually by accident. And so here, the vast majority of states, the way to prove citizenship, and including Michigan, if this ballot initiative is not passed, is to affirm your eligibility and to check off that you're a citizen on the voter registration form, and you provide other identifying information like your date of birth, your driver's license number, and your address. And those things election officials use to verify your eligibility to vote. And we have found, the affirmation alone, because you have to affirm under penalty of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen, it's usually sufficient to actually. I'm being extremely conservative when I say usually. So usually, if it's sufficient to prove someone's citizenship, because the vast majority of people are not going to sign anything under perjury, particularly folks for whom the stakes are so high, like a person who's not a citizen. But there are a couple of states, there are a couple of states, and I'll give you a couple of examples in the next slide, where voters must provide additional documentation. And I'll just say, like, a lot of those in those states, those efforts have not proven to be more effective in identifying who's a citizen, and but they have proven to be significantly more burdensome on the voter themselves. But as of May 1st, legislatures in 24 states, I think there's a movement right now, in response to the SAVE Act, which was introduced in Congress last year, and legislatures in 24 states have introduced some sort of measure to require proof of citizenship for voter registration, including, of course, Michigan. Arizona is our prime example right now of a state that requires documentary proof of citizenship. And they have been the subject of litigation about proof of citizenship for the last 15 years. And they are currently the subject of litigation. And as a result of Arizona's documentary proof of citizenship process, Arizona has what no state wants, which is a bifurcated election system. You have different process for state and local elections than you do for federal elections, and nobody wants that. It has not proven to be more secure, has not proven to do anything but put burdens on voters. Arizona is currently a model, for a bad role model, I should say, for what can happen, because usually these proof of citizenship laws violate federal law. They violate the Constitution, and they usually violate the National Voter Registration Act, which sets the standards for voting in federal elections. And so Arizona, as a result, Arizona has been sued repeatedly, including by us, frankly, because their registration system consistently burdens the rights of Arizona citizens, as well as discriminates usually against Native voters in that state and other voters of color. And so Arizona's are sort of our paradigm. That's where we don't want to go in terms of documentary proof of citizenship. And then we've got other states like Idaho, Louisiana, Montana, New Hampshire, and Ohio and Wyoming, who have very recently introduced some sort of proof of citizenship requirements. I should also say, I think many of those have been subject to litigation. So I would, I caution by saying that these states have documentary proof of citizenship, given that their proof of citizenship requirements are currently being challenged. So the SAVE Act, what's the SAVE Act? The Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act was introduced by Congress last year, and the SAVE Act intends to amend the National Voter Registration Act, which is what I mentioned. The National Voter Registration Act was passed in the early 90s. It's most popularly known as the Motor Voter Bill because it's the federal law that allows all of us to register to vote at the DMV. And so the NVRA it sets the standards for voter registration in federal elections, and the SAVE Act attempts to amend the NVRA to require documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. And so I should just emphasize, SAVE Act is not law. It is Congress's current proposal for it is I should say the majority in Congress's current proposal and the House's current proposal for amending the MVRA is not law, but it does give you a sense of sort of whether trends are moving for voter suppression. Thank you, Melanie. So, and then in addition to the SAVE Act, the current administration issued an executive order because they were unsuccessful in getting the SAVE Act passed, and they instituted an executive order which purported to add a documentary proof of citizenship requirement on the National Voter Registration form. So if you're not familiar, most states use the state-provided registration form, but you can also use what's called the National Voter Registration Form to register to vote in any state and country. And the executive order purported to amend that form to require documentary proof of citizenship. That was unlawful because the president and does not have any business with the regulation of elections, and so that executive order was enjoined and at several lawsuits, including lawsuit that we brought, successfully blocked its enforcement. So that's not law either. But you can kind of see sort of where the trend is moving. Sort of states which are moving in the direction of requiring this proof of citizenship, which we've all learned is both redundant and unnecessary and often discriminatory. The federal it's in response to sort of where the federal administration is trying to move as well. Melanie. Again, the SAVE Act is not yet law, and if the SAVE Act were to pass, we would see sort of those same burdens that we've described, but mirrored across the country, and we would also see those apply to federal elections in Michigan as well. And I won't repeat any of the burdens described by my previous panels, but it's safe to say that those burdens would be amplified if federal legislation was passed to require documentary proof of citizenship. Alrighty. And I think that's all. for us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Valencia and Chris and Melanie. Great presentations. So I think we can put the PowerPoint down so we can see our group of people here. And so if you have questions for the panelists, we have 20 minutes, almost 20 minutes to ask questions for the panelists. So please put your questions in the chat. I know we have a couple of them so far. Denise Hartzau is going to, the League of Women Voters co-president, and Lynn Kokmansky are going to lead the questions. So Denise?
Yeah, I think one we can ask Valencia right now because it's one what she was just talking about. What is the status of the SAVE Act? Didn't it pass the House? Where is it now? Is there an attempt to sneak it into the other federal bills?
That's a great question. So the SAVE Act it got stuck in the House. So it did pass the House. The Senate, it didn't even get a hearing. I don't believe. And so it got stuck in the House. I would be very surprised if they didn't try to reintroduce some form of the SAVE Act in this new Congress. And so, but as of now, a new version has not been introduced, nor to my knowledge have they attempted to sneak in any other any like federal requirements for DPOC in other legislation so far. We do, I mean, it is January 21st, I'll add. So the new Congress, just convened. So we're a little early to tell, but as of now, there has not been the SAVE Act has not been reintroduced.
Okay, thank you. Here's a kind of a general question. I'm not sure which of you would like to answer it, but what might cause someone's attempt to verify their citizenship to be rejected?
If they didn't have the right time, if they didn't have the document, essentially. So if they came with a real ID and thought that was going to be sufficient, it's not sufficient. I mean, a lot of people don't have passports. Most Americans don't have passports. When they've done some kind of polling about trying to figure out how many people don't have citizenship documents on hand, it's about 10% of Americans are said to not have citizenship documents handy. So it wouldn't really be an issue of like presenting your passport and it being turned away. It would be you show up ready to vote and they say, hey, we don't have your citizenship verified yet. Can you give me your birth certificate? And if you don't have it right there to pull out of your briefcase, you're in trouble. So I think that I saw that question. I wasn't sure if that was what you were asking, but I think that's what I think the answer is.
And the other way is, under these new databases being created in Washington, if this were implemented and your data got sent to Washington to be verified, and there's an error, and now there's a question whether you're a citizen or not, and that's what they're finding in a number of states who have been using this. They have found errors. And any new system is going to have errors for quite some time. Having been around when we set up the qualified voter file, it was not a picnic, I'll guarantee you.
That's a great point. And I want to add, Chris knows this because he knows this person as well, but someone we know well who works in this space, one of our colleagues, is a naturalized Canadian, naturalized American citizen, born Canadian, over 20 years. And she went to check her Social Security Administration because you can check and see like what does it say, and it said non-citizen, her Social Security card, because it's not updated with her citizenship, even though it's been 20 years that she's carrying her passport now. So it's a great point. Those databases that they're using as a kind of be all end all for citizenship are in fact at the moment quite faulty.
So I see that Charles is asking a follow-up. He said one of your slides, Melanie, said a voter shows up to vote and is not allowed because they have to prove their citizenship. How does that happen?
So that's just the case that so when this first goes, if the initiative passes, when it first goes into effect, the next election, if you haven't gotten your citizenship verified already, like if you hadn't shown up at your clerk's office and provided your proof of citizenship, or, I mean, they talk about this Secretary of State verification system. It's a little bit fuzzy. I don't know what that means exactly. But if you show up the first time after this initiative is passed, presumably this is going to be quite a lot of us, because I noted this in another answer to someone else's question. Right now, the qualified voter file doesn't have a box that says citizenship, because if you're in the file, you're presumed to be a citizen. So this is adding a layer to the qualified voter file that doesn't currently exist. So right now, none of us are verified citizens in the qualified voter file, except we all are technically verified citizens. So this would be, we would all show up, and if we hadn't had our citizenship verified, we'd be asked to show up with our passports or our birth certificates or whatever it is. So that's what I'm talking about, is the first round of this is going to be a big lift.
Yeah. So there's a question asking, does a woman have to change her birth certificate to match her voter registration name? And if so, like, how would you do that? And what would it cost?
So great, Chris, I don't know if you want to answer this. I heard a go-go one point say that I actually didn't know it was possible to change your birth certificate to match your married name, but according to a go-go, it is.
Okay, I don't know that either, but
Yeah, I didn't know that. Usually folks provide additional information outside of their birth
Right.
certificate, like their marriage license.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and that is an additional cost. Just throwing that on there, because the steps it's another thing to do. And think about it, if you've been married more than once and there's name change several times, it's a lot of backtracking to do.
A lot of documents. Yes. There's been a couple questions about in our state, real ID, enhanced driver's license. Are those the same things? What proves citizenship? Just to clarify that, if somebody could do that.
well, I think as Melanie pointed out, the real ID doesn't necessarily mean citizenship. However, the enhanced license, well, I think the Secretary of State likes to say it's not a citizenship document, but I do believe I have an enhanced, I had to take my birth certificate in. You have to show that you're a United States citizen. It's used to cross the Canadian border. So I think that's the one valid document.
Yeah, and actually Dorothy Cribbs said that's correctly in the notes, what Chris just said. So it's typed up there in the chat if anyone wants to see it.
It costs a little more money.
Costs a little more money.
Okay, there's a lot of things flying in the chat here. One question is, how would verification of citizenship be accomplished by clerks for those voters who are on the automatic absentee voter list, getting their ballots by mail? Anybody have ideas?
I would just say it is very confusing. I've looked very closely at this today. So that it purports that there are 3 ways that voters can be verified. And one of them is this big Secretary of State verification program, which should cover most people. That would be what you would think. The second is the actual voter providing DPOC, the documents. And the third is, before you vote, you've got to show it. So when I originally read that, I thought that, oh, okay, you could go ahead and register to vote. Then the secretary would verify, or before you vote, you're going to have to bring in the documents. But when you go down and read the criminal penalty for clerks, it's a felony for them to take a registration that doesn't have a DPOC with it. I mean, how many people are going to go to a clerk's office to register to vote and bring their birth certificate with them? It's a setup, and it basically will close those offices down as voter registration sites. It just is not something people are ever going to think of doing.
Wow. All right. Let's see. Trying to see what else we have here. Oh, what are the plans for encouraging people not to sign either of the petitions, the documentary proof of citizenship petitions? I don't know, Melanie, if you want to address that.
So there's a pretty robust decline to sign campaign that's trying to get this information out. And so, we can provide some information on that, including some graphics that could be shared. And I think we have website, No Red Tape for Michigan, that I can provide to you. So there are certainly, we're trying to get the word out about what these ballot initiatives mean, and and I think it's worth noting here that it's not illegal for the signature collectors to lie to you about what their petition says. So it's really problematic, and we're really trying to get the word out so that people know what it is and when they see it. But of course, it's very hard because, the world is big.
Right. There's a question about would entities like the League of Women Voters still be able to register voters if there's the citizenship requirement?
Great question. I think, sorry, Valencia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is actually a problem that has come up with across other states with leagues. I'm privileged to represent the league in many other states, and a problem that comes up is the concern about the additional burden to voter registration that occurs as a result of having documentary proof of citizenship. I know of no other organization that registers voters like the league does, and the additional burden of having to do it voter education, for voters, asking voters if they have proof of citizenship and helping them navigate the process is a very real concern that has happened across those states that I've mentioned that have had DPOC laws passed. So I would say, while I can't say that it's not my understanding that the ballot initiatives, for example, bar voter registration, but it can make voter registration harder, and will, particularly registration from third parties like the league.
Yeah, how would it work? I mean, are people going to turn over a copy of their birth certificate to you?
Exactly.
And if you took a voter registration application to a clerk's without that, that clerk's going to say, "Oh, I can't take it because you now put me in a felony situation."
Some states, I don't know of the Michigan, but some states have data provisions that bar them from taking certain types of information during voter registration, which would obviously implicate a law like this. So,
wow. So would online voter registration go away is another question. Or would people be expected to somehow upload their proof of citizenship to the site?
I mean, theoretically, it's not in these proposals. They don't deal with how you would have to do it for online voter registration. And as Chris notes, it's going to be very complicated for election officials to accept them, and without any DPOC coming with it. So it's really, they left that in the air, and that's part of the problem with these proposals, is that they don't make clear how they're going to allow people to vote. And we're trying to make sure that everyone who's eligible can vote.
Yeah. So another question about registering. What is the process if a clerk gets a registration without the citizenship proof needed?
Better call a lawyer.
I was going to say, do they have to burn it? It sounds really dangerous.
Yeah. And of course, as I pointed out, is that the Secretary of State is sitting on most of the documentation. So there should not be a disconnect. In other words, you shouldn't say, "Oh, you can't even file an application to register unless you've got a document in your hand." When you've got a driver's license, you claim you're a citizen on the form. As Melanie indicated, they've washed everyone through requiring these documents over the last several years. So, in any ideal DPOC situation with the Secretary of State, that's where it would work. But they have added things in here that almost appear to be designed to create mischief and to dampen down legitimate voter registration.
We have a question. Do you think this will cause difficulty recruiting poll workers? Because that will be one point of friction, I would imagine.
think anything that adds unnecessary redundancies to the process, an already robust process, is going to affect poll worker recruitment. You know, poll workers do an amazing job, and anything that you're just, adding additional unnecessary work is going to always affect recruitment.
Right. Sandy, do you want to do like time for wrap up? Because we're getting close to the hour.
Yeah, oh yes, it is. I'm having such fun listening to all of this. So, do we have one more question, Denise? Or if
Well,
not,
I mean,
I can
sure. I
just
mean,
wrap up.
one question was, and I know Melanie, you kind of addressed this, but what if both ballot measures, like both got on the ballot and both passed? What do you think would happen then?
So if they both, it will be odd, like they're kind of feeding away each other, but they're both very similar, as I noted. And so, it's possible that some provisions could be read to be together, to both pass. But if there are things that are in conflict, whichever one gets more votes will get the knockout punch. So it will be really interesting to see. I guess I'd be surprised if they both manage to get the number of signatures, because they're not coordinating. So like now we're talking about 1.5 million signatures they're going to have to get for this separately, which is kind of a lot. So I would be surprised. And the more that I'm not hearing about them being very, very close to finish, the better I'm starting to feel. But we know that they're well funded, and we expect that they will be collecting diligently through these cold months, although good luck this weekend.
Right. And there, maybe just one quick last question. Do you know how many signatures have been collected to date or not? Okay. Thanks.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Chris Thomas, former Michigan Director of Elections, Melanie Macey, Policy and Government Affairs Director at Promote the Vote, and Valencia Richardson, Voting Rights Attorney at the Campaign Legal Center, for really outstanding presentations, very informative. It's so hard to understand this stuff. Like none of it makes sense. So it's great to have your explanations. I also want to thank Lynn for helping with all the people who have registered and getting everyone admitted to this meeting. And to Denise for fielding questions, which I think is really the hardest job. So thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. We will send a recording and the PowerPoint and some materials that Melanie's going to send us out in the next few days. So thanks very much.
Okay.